Hey everyone, welcome to Reddit Readout. Today we are checking out ProRevenge. Story 1. I got fired. Employers' lawyers should have done their homework. I did. This happened to me about 20 years ago while in college. I am being deliberately vague because reasons. Background. I got a job, basically office sitting on weekends. I showed up at 8 a.m. and every hour I checked over things, handled the occasional phone call, and then left when the 4 p.m. person arrived. Most of the time I read, watched TV, or played games on my laptop. I probably worked no more 10 minutes of every hour unless something went wrong. It went on like this for years. The pay was decent, holidays were double pay, and I even had opportunities to cover weekday shifts when others were sick. One day while I was covering the midday shift, my boss asked me to come into his office. He told me that the evening weekday position was going to become available that night. He offered me the position, which I accepted. I was told to punch out and return at 5 p.m. that night. The reason it went down like this should be obvious. Things went okay for a while. I showed up at 4 p.m., did the normal things, and then left at 12 a.m. when my relief arrived. It was a little more work, more call volumes, etc. Then, after 9 months, things started to go south. The daytime person developed a huge attitude problem and went from a nice person to a total Karen. She would complain about everything I did. For example, one time a system jammed up at a remote site and she called them. 5 hours later I saw the jam was still there, so I called that site again to see if they were still working on it or if something else was wrong, because the woman on our end who would be the one to help them was leaving soon. They did have a problem and so I hooked them up. My reward for making sure the problem got solved and not having to bother an upper-level employee at home, on a Friday, just after having left work? I got yelled at because Karen complained that I had apparently ignored her log entry about the issue. My defense was ignored. The boss had me highlight important things on the log to verify that I had read them. Things plodded on for a while with this new normal. I tiptoed around Karen when needed, thankful for the fact I only had to deal with her for no more than 5 minutes. I did the stupid highlighting thing and my log entries started getting more and more detailed, even referencing Karen's calls when I had to follow up on an issue that crossed shifts. The firing. The following summer, just after I crossed year mark, I went on vacation to visit some friends out of state. When I got back, after about a week, my boss came down after everyone had left and had me describe how I did a certain task which involved certain updates. I explained to him how I did it and so forth. He then told me that I had not been doing it at all and that he was firing me. I had transposed the date code of the English file for the French file, which was the previous one. The newest one had already been applied anyways, so nothing was wrong. It was just a reason to get rid of me. So I left the office. My state is an at-will employment state, which means that I can quit at any time for any reason and my employer can terminate me at any time for any reason. The only exceptions were state and federal laws such as race, religion, etc. I thought I was screwed. So I just started applying everywhere I could. During my job search I happened to accidentally stumble upon a link about employment law. Out of curiosity I read it and discovered that my employer had shot themselves in the foot. In the employee handbook, there was a job security clause. What this stated was that they would never lay us off and such if our jobs were eliminated. We would simply be retrained and sent to fill an opening elsewhere in the company. It sounds good, but it resulted in them cooking up reasons to fire people to get around it. But their fancy, high-priced lawyers had missed something. In my state's laws, the ones passed by the legislature, I was screwed because of at-will. What they neglected was case law, the ones determined by courts. This site cited a case from the state's Supreme Court that had ruled that a job security clause waived at will on the employer's side, turning it into a just cause relationship. This means that they had to have a real reason to fire me. The revenge. With that in hand, I sought out a lawyer. After my consultation with her, I set about collecting my evidence. My former boss did not realize that I knew more about this program than he did, seeing as I ran the same software on my own computer and laptop. I experimented. The date of the file, which they tried to use against me, is baked into the version 2. I was able to demonstrate to my lawyer that if I applied the same update over and over, which my former employer stated would change the date every day, would, in reality, display the date of the file. I showed this by backdating my own copy by a year using the update archive available from the vendor. Next, I showed her how the task used to be automated. A script would snag the file and process it every day on its own. A change on the vendor's site broke the script. It was an easy fix, but no one bothered to do it because the guy who had wrote it retired. The fix involved deleting 3 characters on one line in the script. The task was also marked as only being a weekday task. In my firing I was told how important this update was and so forth. If it was so important, why was it not done on weekends or holidays? The vendor pushed out updates on those days too, as I showed my lawyer the one from Christmas morning. And why had the automation not been fixed? With all that in hand, she contacted them. After presenting them with the law they broke and all the evidence I had collected, they were forced to settle with me. So in the end, their fancy high-priced lawyers did not do their homework, I did. Thank you to the wonderful librarians I have known in my life who taught me my information literacy skills. They paid dividends in this case. TLDR, I got fired by a large corporation and though I had no recourse. Then I found out their lawyers missed something in my state's laws and forced them to pay me. Edit 1. Obviously the terms of the settlement are confidential and, a fake, still in effect. It was a good portion of my salary though. I did also get unemployment during this time as well. I never found out how the reaction went down as the main corporate office that would have dealt with it was in another state and I never had any contact with those people. I imagine a new handbook was issued before they cut my check though, so I feel bad for those who remained. Karen's fate was sealed about a year later. I saw a Facebook post by a former coworker mentioning that his job with them had ended, so I asked for details. The company experienced a huge loss in revenue. As a result, Karen lost her job as the site I had worked in was closed. Of about the 50 of us that worked in that office, only 10 or so were moved to another location. Thankfully most of the ones I liked were old enough to retire. It did not take a genius to realize that my termination was simply a layoff disguised as a firing. Story 2. Coworker screamed in my face, triggering an anxiety attack, tries to fight my boyfriend and somehow got the boss on his side for all of it. Neither realized I'd have rock hard evidence of everything for HR, plus a cameo of way too much sexual harassment. This story takes place a few years ago when I was working security for a baseball park. I wasn't one of the security guards checking bags or showing people seats, though, game day security. My department was 24-hour security, handling mostly guarding restricted areas, watching cameras, and keeping an eye out for the emergencies in the park. Both departments have their own boss, with one boss above them overseeing security in general. It was a really cool job, especially considering how beautiful the park was. When I would work night shifts, I'd usually be the only one walking around the park, and we had such beautiful views of the city, and even a river walk that was part of our patrol. Unfortunately, most of my co-workers were sexist middle-aged men. At the time of this story, I was 20 years old, 5'2", 112 pounds. I'd actually already quit once before for sexual harassment. A coworker would start random conversations with me and insist I should work with him just to spend as much time as he could with me, then behind my back was insisting to everyone I wanted him as well as making. Story 3. That time I accidentally worked for the Russian mafia and proxy blew up a dumpster with bread dough. I'm a professional baker, and have worked for various companies developing recipes and the like. I found a job at a local grocery store, working super early mornings on their pastries for the day. There were usually a few other people there, one of whom was a mixer. Mixers typically follow a spec sheet with the weights of all the ingredients they need to batch mix. It's kind of mindless work and doesn't require much thought. He was a young guy, fresh out of his teens. We became fast co-worker friends, and enjoyed chatting it up about baking, and I'd help him put our supply order away. Good times. One day, a woman with a thick Russian accent came in and handed us business cards. She told us whatever we're getting paid, her company would double it if we came to work for them. I scheduled an interview, thinking this would be a great opportunity for me. It was a new grocery store concept, like a glitzy glammy European-style Costco, whatever that means. When I went in for the interview, the place was literally still under construction. I met their lead baker and we hit it off right away. He warned me that the big boss had interesting tastes and we'd need to work with that. No biggie. More money, let's go. They hired us both and, over the next several months, it was a really interesting and fun experience. The big boss, thick, burly Russian man, to the point and perpetually angry, wanted this place to be like Costco mass production of quality pastries. They were bringing in crazy amounts of new equipment, including folders, shapers, and injectors that were easily worth millions. We didn't have much equipment to start, and we were doing a lot of mixing in trash cans. Remember my mixer buddy? Well, he was working on the bread dough, using spec sheets provided by our lead baker. Over time they were bringing on more staff, and it was a lot of fun developing new recipes, experimenting with ratios, and figuring out how to get over constraints for the types of products that boss wanted. Did I mention he was an asshole? Oh yeah. When he was reviewing some cheesecake I had made, he said, "Good job, sweetie." I came back with "Miss, ma'am," or "My name is fine." He scowled at me, and from that point on he treated me like garbage. We brought other women on staff. I watched him hit on them. Some of the others were cool with being sexually harassed, I guess. This place was paying top dollar and had to get in good with the big boss, right? So, the stage is set here. Boss quickly turned his business into a game of survivor. He'd fire people on the spot for whatever reason. One day, one of the people he sacked was our lead baker. It came as a surprise since he was developing all the recipes we'd be using. I inherited a lot of his notes, and his development work was divided between me and the mixer. So, this whole time Mixer was kissing Big Boss ass pretty hard. He was seeing an open position with the lead baker gone, and quickly became invested in the idea of him running the bakery show and making some serious money. At the same time, my relationship with Big Boss was quickly declining. For an example, I had him sample some cinnamon rolls I had made, and he came back with, "I hate these, they're terrible." "What do you not like?" "We can change anything about them." "The dough? The filling? The icing?" "I don't know, I just don't like them." On a hunch, I gave some cinnamon rolls from the same batch to another lady there he had eyes for, and asked her if she'd present them to him as her own. She offered him the same product I had given him minutes before, and he loved it. Anyway, I noticed that my notes were out of place one day, and a coworker informed me my mixer buddy was stealing my work and presenting it as his own. He was also approaching me and asking a lot of baking questions, which was fine, but I knew that his knowledge of industrial ratio baking was mediocre at best. He was a mixer. Following a recipe is all he knew how to do. Knowing this, I made a decoy copy of my notes, but this time I put really awful recipes, with huge amounts of salt or yeast. Anyone who knew how to build a recipe could probably look at it and go, "Whoa, that's a lot." Not Mixer Buddy. My original plan was to leave this in a obvious spot as bait and let him steal the awful recipes, but Big Boss had other plans. We sat down for a pre-launch meeting and he informed me I wasn't going to be working in the bakery anymore, and being relegated to store setup. Mixer was going to be taking over as the lead baker. Guess all that ass-kissing really paid off, and I was to give him all my notes so far. No problem, boss. A day later was when the fun really began. Mixer mixed up a huge batch of super-ass salty cake batter, and I heard Big Boss screaming at him about way too much salt. That's not even where the fun begins. As we were setting up an industrial quantity baking equipment, we had to test the larger quantity mixing machines, and did a test run for some bread dough, with my decoy recipe that had triple the yeast and sugar. As it didn't come out right, Mixer had to throw it away. His choice? The dumpster out back in the dead heat of summer. Hundreds of pounds of dough. The fun thing about massive amounts of bread dough is that it doesn't magically stop rising if you throw it away, especially in a hot dumpster. A few hours later, I spied out back to see Mixer Buddy shoveling this massive blob of dough into trash bags that had exploded from the dumpster like an uncovered blender spewing out a yeast-laden smoothie. Here's a photo of what it looked like. It's not the original dumpster, but it should give you an idea of how awful it is. Sweet revenge. Now, about the mafia thing, this store was really strange. They had been ordering doubles of all the crazy industrial baking equipment and storing them in back. We had nowhere to put any of this. I also looked up the company they were subcontracted under, and it was to a dead address in Russia. Big Boss also had armed security guards everywhere. This was a grocery store, mind you. I had a feeling that this company was more of a front for laundering a bunch of money. I eventually was fired by Big Boss, which was great because I had been job hunting, full well knowing this business was a sinking ship. I had a new job lined up already. They had their grand opening, did business for 3 months, then closed. Rib Mixer. TLDR, I was ordered to give a coworker some recipes I had tweaked to fail prior, and a dumpster blew up. That's all for today. Please don't forget to like and subscribe.